They said I was too expensive. After 18 years of building the backbone of this company, my CEO smirked and told me 3 fresh graduates could replace me. Greed spoke through his grin. Envy flashed in my former protege's eyes, and pride convinced them I was disposable. I smiled politely, packed my desk, and walked away in silence. But I carried something they didn't know, a key no one else could use. When the cracks appeared and the empire began to crumble, their frantic calls started. And my silence, sharper than revenge, became the loudest answer. For 18 years, I had lived inside those glass walls more than in my own home. I was Ethan Miller, head of engineering, the man who had built the skeleton and veins of every system that company relied on. My badge was scanned before sunrise and long after the janitors dragged their mops across the empty hallways. I thought loyalty was a currency that would never depreciate. But loyalty is invisible until it is betrayed. Night after night, I sat in the humming silence of the server room, watching lines of code roll across the screen like a secret language only I could understand. I solved problems no one else could even pronounce, patched emergencies at 2 a.m. while others slept. Once, when the company's mainframe threatened to collapse during a client demonstration, I stayed 40 hours straight, fueled by coffee and sheer duty, until the system ran smoothly again. They cheered, but not for me. They cheered for the company logo. At home, the price of devotion carved itself into my family's life. I remember creeping into the house long past midnight, setting my briefcase down as softly as I could. Through the narrow gap of my daughter's bedroom door, I saw her small hand draped over the edge of the bed, her breath steady with sleep. I whispered promises she never heard. In the kitchen, my wife looked up from her cup of cold tea and asked quietly, "How many nights do we lose before this job gives us something back?" I had no answer. I always told myself tomorrow would be different. Tomorrow never arrived. Then came the day that should have been my triumph. A multi-million-dollar contract had been secured, the kind of deal that would keep the company's future secured for years. And it was my design, my architecture, that had convinced the clients we could deliver. I expected nothing extravagant. Just a line on the announcement, maybe a nod from the CEO at the company-wide meeting. Instead, as the projector lit up the screen, my name was nowhere. The applause erupted for someone else. It wasn't a mistake. The slide credited innovative leadership to a department head who had never touched a single line of the code. I clapped along with everyone else, my palms stinging with every hollow strike. Pride is supposed to feel warm, but I felt nothing but a cold draft where recognition should have been. I sat there, face neutral, but inside a voice whispered, "Do you see it now? 18 years, and you are invisible." Later that evening, as congratulations floated around in emails and handshakes, my phone buzzed with a single message from my wife. "She waited to show you her drawing. She fell asleep before you came." I closed my eyes. Somewhere between the servers I had built and the contracts I had secured, my daughter had learned not to wait for me. I had taught her absence instead of presence. Driving home that night, the city lights blurred against the windshield. My hands tightened around the steering wheel. But the anger wasn't for them. It was for myself. For believing loyalty was a shield. For thinking sacrifice was a guarantee of respect. When I finally stepped through the front door, the house was quiet. I wandered to my daughter's room and saw the drawing taped to her wall, A stick figure family, all holding hands, except one figure drawn outside the line, clutching a laptop. I recognized myself instantly. My chest tightened. I had become a ghost, even in her imagination. In the darkness of that room, I whispered, "I'll fix this. Somehow." But even I didn't know if I meant fixing the company or fixing the man I had become. The next morning, emails poured in celebrating the team's achievement. My inbox was full of praise meant for others. No one mentioned my name. That was when I realized the cruelest betrayal isn't when others take credit. It's when you realize you've willingly given them the chance. And still, I worked. Still, I came in before dawn. Still, I stayed until after midnight, convincing myself there would be a day when someone finally said, "This man kept us alive." That day never came. Instead, there was a calendar invite, private meeting, CEO's office, no agenda. My gut turned cold. As I straightened my tie and walked down the sterile hallway, something in me shifted. The same hands that had written millions of lines of code now trembled, not from exhaustion, but from knowing the end of 18 years might be waiting behind that glass door. I pushed it open. Richard Hale, the CEO, leaned back in his leather chair, a smile that wasn't a smile curling on his lips. And sitting to his right, in a perfectly tailored suit, was Lucas Grant, my former protege, the kid I had mentored fresh out of college. Lucas didn't meet my eyes. He didn't need to. His silence screamed enough. Richard gestured to the chair across from him. "Sit, Ethan. We need to talk." The loyalty that had kept me alive for 18 years suddenly felt like a noose tightening around my neck. The morning after my termination felt almost unreal. For the first time in nearly 2 decades, I wasn't rushing to beat the sun into the office. Instead, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at a bowl of cereal that was slowly turning soggy. Across from me, my daughter swung her legs under the chair, humming to herself, completely unaware of how strange it felt for me to be there. "Daddy, you're here," she said between bites, eyes wide as if she had spotted a rare animal in her kitchen. "I'm here," I answered, forcing a smile. The words tasted foreign. My wife watched me quietly from the stove, her expression unreadable. For years she had eaten breakfast without me, raised our daughter through milestones I had missed, endured dinners where the only guest was an empty chair. Now I was back, but I could feel the invisible weight of her silence. As I chewed, my thoughts spiraled. 18 years of loyalty, 18 years of sweat and sacrifice, gone in the span of an 18-minute meeting. 18 years, erased in 18 minutes. The words clung to me, bitter and suffocating. Later that day, I opened my laptop out of habit, though I no longer had a company email. Instead, a message appeared in a private account I hadn't used in years. The subject line was blank. The sender, anonymous. My chest tightened as I clicked. "Ethan, they're pushing the new system live next week. You know the vulnerabilities. You warned them. They ignored you. If they do this, everything could collapse." I scrolled down, scanning the attached logs. The same flaws I had flagged months earlier were still there, untouched. If exploited, those gaps could cripple entire operations. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, instinct screaming at me to respond, to fix it, to protect the company I had once bled for. But then I remembered Richard's smirk, Lucas's silence, the hollow applause that swallowed my name whole. At the bottom of the email was one final line, chilling in its simplicity. "They don't know you're the only one who can fix it." I shut the laptop with a snap, heart pounding. That night, as I tucked my daughter into bed, she looked up at me and whispered, "Are you home for good now?" Her small hand clung to mine, her eyes full of hope I didn't deserve. "Yes," I said, though I wasn't sure if the word was true or just another promise waiting to break. Days later, the silence shattered. News leaked that the company's new system had failed during a major client trial. Transactions were lost, data corrupted, and within hours, their biggest client had threatened to terminate the contract. I watched from the outside, headlines flashing across financial feeds. My phone buzzed. Richard's name lit up the screen. I let it ring. He called again and again. On the third attempt, I picked up. "Ethan, listen." His voice was clipped, frantic. "We need you. This rollout, I don't work there anymore," I interrupted, my tone colder than I intended. "You can't just walk away. You know this system better than anyone." "You made sure I walked away," I said, then ended the call. My pulse raced, but for once it wasn't from fear. It was clarity. Inside the company, Lucas was scrambling. I still had friends there, and their whispers reached me. Lucas strutted through the halls, pretending to have control, telling staff to hold the line, while investors screamed in the background. But beneath the bravado, cracks widened. Panic seeped into every corner. Late one evening, my phone rang again. This time it wasn't Richard. It was a voice I knew too well. Grace, one of my oldest colleagues. Her sobs echoed through the line before she could form words. "They're making us cut corners, Ethan," she choked. "Richard says speed matters more than safety. They made me sign off on something I know will fail. I begged him, but he said if I didn't, they'd find someone else who would. I don't know what to do." I closed my eyes, gripping the phone until my knuckles whitened. Grace had always been one of the most principled engineers I knew. For her to cry like this meant the rot had sunk deeper than I imagined. "You have to protect yourself," I told her softly. "Don't let them bury you with their mistakes." "But you could fix this," she whispered, almost pleading. I swallowed hard, fighting the urge to say yes. "Not anymore," I said, and hung up. The next morning, the news hit like a hammer. The contract was gone. Investors pulled out. Shares plummeted by double digits before noon. I sat at the breakfast table again, the same cereal in front of me, the same silence around me. Except this time, my phone stayed dark. The empire I had built was collapsing without me, and for the first time in 18 years, I realized the most dangerous weapon I had was not my skill, not my code, not even the USB hidden in my drawer. It was my silence. Richard's voice became a constant ghost in my life. My phone buzzed in the morning, during lunch, late at night, always his number, always ignored. Sometimes he left voicemails, his tone shifting from commanding to pleading. "Ethan, we need to talk. Ethan, don't make a mistake you'll regret. Ethan, you're the only one who can fix this." Each message dripped with desperation, and each time I pressed delete, I felt a strange satisfaction. But outside of his crumbling empire, my world had finally slowed. I took afternoons to sit with my mother, now fragile with age. We drank tea on her porch, watching the autumn leaves scatter across the lawn. She reached over one afternoon, her wrinkled hand brushing mine. "People betrayed you," she said softly. "But don't betray yourself. Bitterness eats faster than fire." I nodded, though I wasn't sure I agreed. Was my silence bitterness, or was it justice? Maybe both. Then the headlines exploded. Company under fire for concealing system failure. Investors demand answers in multi-million-dollar collapse. The story spread like wildfire. Executives had deliberately hidden the flaws in the new system to secure contracts. Anonymous sources leaked internal memos. Richard's empire wasn't just crumbling, it was rotting from within. My chest tightened as I read, because I knew the truth. Those memos, those flaws, they had my fingerprints. If anyone wanted a scapegoat, I was the perfect target. That night, another anonymous message landed in my inbox. Lucas is setting you up as the scapegoat. The words burned into me. I pictured Lucas, the kid I once taught to code, sitting in boardrooms now, his sharp jaw set with ambition, his tongue silver enough to convince investors that I was the architect of every disaster. It was the kind of betrayal you don't see coming until the knife is already twisting. Sleep evaded me. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if silence had carried me too far. The following week, I received a call that wasn't from Richard. A smooth voice introduced himself as part of Orion Systems, a direct competitor I had always respected. Mr. Miller, we've been following the situation closely. We believe you deserve better than what you received. We'd like you to join us. I listened in silence as he laid out their offer. Twice my old salary, a leadership position, total autonomy over engineering decisions. For a man discarded as too expensive, it was intoxicating to be courted this way. But money wasn't what hooked me. His next words did. We know what happened to you. We know how they treated you. At Orion, transparency and respect aren't slogans. They're policy. We don't want to own your nights and steal your family. We want you to build, but not at the cost of yourself. My pulse quickened. I thought of my daughter's drawing, the stick figure holding a laptop outside the family. For the first time, I saw the possibility of drawing myself back inside. I'll consider it, I told him carefully, but only if I can set my own conditions. Integrity, fair treatment, no cutting corners. Then you'll feel at home here, he replied smoothly. When the call ended, I stared at the silent phone in my hand. A door had opened, but behind me, the house I had built for 18 years was still burning. And the flames had a way of reaching further than expected. 2 days later, I walked into Orion's office for a private discussion. To my surprise, I recognized faces, engineers I had once worked alongside, now scattered by Richard's endless cost-cutting. They looked at me with a mix of relief and admiration, as if my arrival meant the nightmare was over. We all ended up here, one whispered. You'll finally get to build the way you always wanted. Their faith was a weight I wasn't sure I could carry. But it was also the first time in years I felt like I wasn't alone. That night, as I drove home, headlights flared in my rearview mirror. The car followed me for blocks. Every turn mirrored. My skin prickled. When I slowed, it slowed. When I sped up, it did too. Finally, at the last intersection before my street, the car peeled away. My gut told me exactly who was behind it. Lucas. He wasn't going to let me start fresh without a fight. The next evening, just as I sat down to dinner with my family, the doorbell rang. I opened it to find Richard Hale standing on my porch. His tie was loose, his eyes bloodshot, and his voice hoarse. Ethan, he said, almost breaking, we need to talk, please. Richard stood on my porch like a man stripped of his armor. The CEO I once knew, confident and untouchable, had been replaced by someone hollowed out by fear. His hands trembled as he clutched his briefcase, his voice unsteady. "Ethan," he said, "please, just listen." I didn't move. My daughter's laughter carried faintly from the living room, the sound of a life I had nearly missed for 18 years. Richard glanced past me, his eyes softening for just a second. "You don't belong out here. You belong with us, with the company." I stepped outside, shutting the door behind me. "I don't belong to your empire anymore. I fight for my daughter's future, not your empire." The words hit him like a slap. He sagged against the porch railing, exhaling heavily. "You think this was my choice? You think I wanted to push you out? You were the best man I had." His voice cracked. "But I'm not the one pulling the strings." I frowned. "What are you saying?" He lowered his briefcase and pulled out a folder thick with papers. His eyes darted nervously up and down the street before shoving it into my hands. "The board, the investors, they're not just shareholders. They're an entire network. Banks, shadow funds, people with more power than you and I combined. They told me to cut costs, make examples, keep the numbers rising. And if I didn't..." He trailed off, shaking his head. "They would have replaced me with someone worse, someone who wouldn't hesitate." I flipped open the folder. Inside were copies of emails, financial reports, signatures authorizing cover-ups, documents that didn't just hint at corruption, they screamed it. Millions funneled, lies told to regulators, employees scapegoated to preserve profits. My name appeared in several places, tied to projects I had built, as though preparing me to be the perfect fall guy. Richard rubbed his temples. "I wanted you gone, because they told me you were dangerous. You knew too much. I thought cutting you loose would protect me." My jaw tightened. "And now?" His voice dropped. "Now they're preparing to use me as the next scapegoat. Ethan, I'm finished. But you might still have a chance to expose them. Take it." I studied the papers, the weight of them heavy in my hands. This wasn't just about me anymore. It wasn't even about Richard. It was about a machine of greed that chewed up anyone in its path. Before I could answer, movement flickered at the edge of my vision. Across the street, a car idled with its headlights off. Through the windshield, I spotted the faint glow of a cigarette. Lucas, watching, waiting. Richard followed my gaze, and his face paled. "He's not here for me. He's here for you." I closed the folder and tucked it under my arm. Then he'll learn I'm not as disposable as he thinks. The next morning, headlines erupted again. Internal documents had leaked to the press. The scandal widened into a storm that could no longer be contained. Reporters circled the company's headquarters like vultures, cameras flashing, microphones thrust at trembling executives. Within hours, Richard was suspended pending investigation. The board wasted no time. They pushed Lucas into the spotlight, hailing him as the fresh face who would restore confidence. But power is a crown that burns when it doesn't fit. Lucas strutted across news conferences with slick words and smug smiles. But inside the company walls, chaos ruled. Systems failed. Employees fled. Clients pulled contracts faster than they could be replaced. I watched it all unfold from a distance, a strange mix of pity and grim satisfaction coiling in my chest. But then the whispers reached me. Lucas hadn't just risen by accident. He had orchestrated Richard's downfall, feeding the board just enough poison to make them believe he was the cure. It was Lucas who had pointed to me as the scapegoat. Lucas who had sold out his mentor to climb higher. The betrayal was complete. Employees I once mentored called me in secret, their voices strained with despair. "He doesn't know what he's doing, Ethan. He's tearing everything apart. People are leaving in droves. It's not just incompetence, it's sabotage. He wants to burn the old house down so he can build his own." The dominoes fell, one after another. Contracts lost, lawsuits filed, the empire collapsing in full view of the world. That evening, as I sat in my study reviewing the folder Richard had given me, my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, blocked. I almost ignored it, but something in my gut told me to answer. A voice, low and deliberate, came through the line. "Mr. Miller, we know what you have. We want it." The call ended before I could respond, leaving only the dead hum of the dial tone. I sat frozen, the folder heavy on my desk, the walls of my quiet house closing in around me. The game had changed. It was no longer just Richard or Lucas. Something larger had taken notice, and they wanted me. The call haunted me long after the line went dead. "We know what you have. We want it." I stared at the folder Richard had given me, then at the USB drive hidden deep in my desk drawer. For years, it had been a contingency, a silent insurance policy in case the systems I built were ever turned against me. Now, for the first time, I felt its weight, like a live weapon. In the following days, more threads unraveled. Whispers from old colleagues, fragments of articles buried in financial journals, encrypted messages sent from anonymous accounts, all painted a picture larger than I had imagined. Richard hadn't lied. The board wasn't just a board. It was part of a shadow network of investors and funds that spread across industries like invisible roots. They controlled not just one company, but dozens, maybe hundreds, pulling strings from the safety of offshore accounts and shell corporations. Richard had been nothing but a pawn, a convenient mask for their greed. And Lucas? He was their next project, a sharp young face to sell the illusion of change while the same poison ran beneath. He had betrayed me, betrayed Richard, and now, with blind ambition, wanted to join the players instead of being played. The thought chilled me more than angered me. If Lucas succeeded, he wouldn't just destroy one company. He'd become part of the very machine that had consumed me. But if I exposed them, if I released what Richard had given me and what I still held, the backlash could scorch everything in its path. Employees, families, even friends still trapped inside those walls. They would be collateral damage. One night, unable to sleep, I sat in the living room, staring at the USB between my fingers. My daughter patted in, rubbing her eyes. "Daddy, why are you awake?" I forced a smile. "Just thinking about work, sweetheart." "But you don't work there anymore." Her words struck me harder than she knew. Out of the mouths of children came truths adults spent lifetimes avoiding. When she went back to bed, I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts. There were names. People who had been forced out like me, cast aside because they were too expensive or not a cultural fit. One by one, I reached out. To my surprise, they answered. And one by one, they told me the same thing. They hadn't forgotten. They had been gathering too. Quietly, patiently, documenting the ways the system bled them dry. Engineers, analysts, accountants, all holding fragments of a story too big for one man to carry. I wasn't alone. I never had been. That realization burned like fire through my chest. The decision I thought was mine alone had always been bigger. I wasn't just the keeper of one USB. I was part of a network, an unseen resistance. The next day, I booted up my laptop and slid the USB into its port. The screen flickered, code spilling across like rain. For a moment, I hesitated. Crossing this line meant there was no turning back. But then Richard's folder, Grace's tears, my wife's quiet disappointment, and my daughter's drawing of me standing outside the family, all came rushing back. I pressed enter. Somewhere deep within the servers, silent protocols I had embedded years ago began to stir. They were never meant as sabotage, only as safeguards, tools to expose weaknesses before they could be exploited. But in the wrong hands, they were devastating. In mine, they could become something else, a torch in the dark. The code activated, connecting with encrypted channels. Data began to flow outward, not to destroy, but to replicate, to protect. Copies of the documents, the evidence, the corruption logs, all were being sent to multiple hidden vaults, places no single entity could reach at once. A message blinked across my screen. Transfer in progress. 17% complete. I leaned back, my pulse hammering. The reckoning had begun. Hours later, news broke again. Leaked documents, new testimonies, regulators circling like wolves. Lucas's carefully curated image began to crack under the glare. He gave interviews with the same arrogant calm, but his words rang hollow against the avalanche of evidence. And then another twist. Richard reappeared, not as a fallen king, but as a witness. In exchange for leniency, he turned on Lucas, testifying to the board's manipulation and Lucas's role in orchestrating lies. The man who once betrayed me was now betraying the very protege who had betrayed us both. The irony was almost poetic. Yet as the fire spread, my chest tightened. If everything came out, every document, every signature, innocent people would be caught in the flames. Employees who had only done their jobs, families who relied on their paychecks. My silence had once been my weapon, but now my voice could be just as dangerous. That night, I sat on the edge of my daughter's bed as she drifted to sleep. I brushed a strand of hair from her forehead and whispered, more to myself than to her, sometimes silence is the loudest scream. Because I knew then, the hardest choice wasn't whether to fight. It was how much truth the world could bear without burning everything down. The storm eventually passed, though its wreckage remained scattered across headlines and ruined careers. The company I had given 18 years to was little more than a hollow shell now, its reputation torn apart, its empire of greed reduced to ash. Yet from the rubble of one life, another began to take shape. The offer from Orion Systems became reality. Walking into their offices felt like stepping into a world I had almost forgotten could exist. Open windows instead of closed blinds. Conversations built on trust instead of suspicion. People greeted each other by name, not title. Transparency wasn't a buzzword framed on the wall. It was lived in every meeting, every decision. For the first time in decades, I felt like I belonged somewhere that valued more than the numbers on a spreadsheet. On my first morning, I drove my daughter to school. She sat in the passenger seat, clutching her backpack, humming a tune. I watched her reflection in the side window, and it struck me. This was the first time in 18 years I had done something so ordinary, so small, yet so profound. When we pulled up to the gates, she turned, smiled, and said, "I like this version of you, Daddy." The words filled me with a warmth no paycheck ever could. Inside Orion, I began to discover something even more surprising. Many of the faces I saw were familiar, engineers who had once sat beside me at late-night desks, analysts discarded for being redundant, designers cast aside because they cost too much. This company wasn't just another firm. It was a refuge built by survivors of the same betrayals I had endured. They, too, had chosen to rise from the ashes and create a culture of fairness, respect, and integrity. We were bound not only by skill, but by scars. And together, we turned those scars into the foundation of something stronger. Weeks passed. Projects took shape. And for the first time, I found myself leaving the office before sunset, heading home to dinners that were no longer cold. Yet peace was fragile, and the shadows of the past never fully retreated. One evening, after logging off, I opened my email to find a message with no sender. The subject line was a single phrase: "Another company needs your voice." The body of the email was brief. "They are what your old company once was. Bleeding people dry. Hide and rot under glossy reports. You know how to expose them, will you?" I stared at the screen long after the words blurred. The war I thought I had left behind wasn't contained to one empire. It was systemic, sprawling, endless. For every Richard or Lucas toppled, there would be another waiting to rise. The message was both a warning and an invitation. And though I didn't answer right away, I knew this fight might never truly be over. Months later, the final domino fell. My old company filed for bankruptcy. Investigations forced an industry-wide reckoning. Regulators imposed new standards. Watchdogs circled like hawks. Lucas, once paraded as the golden boy, was plastered across headlines in disgrace, fraud, manipulation, betrayal. His face became a symbol of everything rotten in corporate greed. On the day the news broke, I was at my daughter's birthday party. For the first time in her life, I was there from the moment she woke until the candles burned low on her cake. She laughed as I carried her on my shoulders, her eyes bright with the kind of joy I had missed for so long. My wife stood watching, tears shining in her eyes. "You finally came home," she whispered. Later that night, after the guests left and the house grew quiet, I sat at my desk. The USB that once weighed like a weapon now lay dormant in a drawer, replaced by new plans. I had founded a trust, an initiative to support engineers and workers betrayed by their companies. A place where loyalty wasn't a liability, but a strength. Where stories like mine could become something more than cautionary tales. The papers called it philanthropy. I knew better. It was atonement. For every night I missed, for every moment I traded away for a company that never cared, this was my way of giving back. Before bed, I checked in on my daughter. She was asleep, clutching the stuffed bear I had given her when she was 5. I lingered by the doorway, listening to her steady breathing, a peace I had once thought I'd lost forever. I leaned closer, whispered into the darkness words meant only for her, words that had carried me through betrayal, silence, and redemption. I kept my promise. I chose silence, and silence chose justice.